Hello, everyone. Welcome. Please welcome the Flute Practice, otherwise known as Tatiana, as you guys can see. So we should get into your specialty, which is flute practice tips or just music tips in general. What's your first tip for us?
One of my really, I think, for the last couple of months, it's been like one of my big tips. It's not what you practice, it's how you practice it. And this kind of comes from my experience of seeing students spend a lot of time thinking, okay, if they just do these technical exercises and if they just play these etudes or studies and if they just do all the things or go through the motions, then you'll get better. And while there's a lot of wisdom in all of that, there's certainly good or better technical exercises. I think so often we make the mistake of just going through it mindlessly without a specific focus or goal in mind, or just looking at how we're actually working with the material and how we're using it to help us rather than just going through the motions.
Yes, I agree. Actually, this is a great segue into my first tip. Do not expect to be perfect at the end of a practice session. It is fair to expect yourself to be better or to have learned something. So in some way you've improved yourself, but I do think it's impossible to be perfect, right? Going along your tip where it's like, you got to be mindful. I think sometimes what we do is we assume we will become perfect if we go through the motions. When in reality, when a musician is repeating the same thing over and over and they're actually getting better, likely what's actually happening is they're kind of going through a mental checklist of different things to look out for, right? And with every repetition, they're improving the next thing on their checklist, right? But to anyone listening, it would just sound like they're just repeating the same thing over and over and over again.
I really love that shift of not thinking of like perfection and everything has to be 100% correct, but rather just trying to build each day a little bit more, a little bit more.
Exactly. Like, I think it's fair to expect that you learned something or you just like heightened your understanding of what you're doing or what you're doing wrong. Because sometimes I might sound relatively the same by the end of a practice session, but I have a much better understanding of what I'm doing wrong.
I want to get to my second point because actually this kind of ties in with that as well. Obviously, we're always looking for mistakes. We are definitely looking for mistakes, but to actually celebrate when we find mistakes. Because now you know it's there and now you can fix it. What tends to happen is that there's this loop of you find a mistake and then this whole cycle starts of, oh my goodness, I can't believe you're playing like this. What's the matter with you? How could you still be making this mistake? And this whole negative cycle starts. And then we first have to kind of like get over ourselves and that whole nonsense that's going on there before we actually get to fixing the mistake. We're going to have to fix it anyway. So let's just cut that all out and actually get right into just fixing it and be grateful that you found it. Now you know.
That's perfect. I have had to talk myself into doing that. It's so hard, but it is such a better, mentally much more healthy mindset. I think our brains are wired to just function better in a positive mindset. And, when we're beating ourselves up, it just kind of makes everything worse. Oh, I feel that. Well, my second point is to treat the flute or flute playing research as practice. So when you're researching flutes or you're researching flute practice methods or flute playing methods, or just listening to different flutists playing. The reason why I have this as a tip is because I used to just tell my students, okay, here are some names of some flutists, and I would love for you to take a look at how they play and also listen to their sound. So, what I'm trying to do is kind of give them like an immersive experience, right? Which is really difficult to achieve outside of the music school. One of the things that I have, what I've noticed helps is if I tell students, hey, when you are doing this research, just do it in the time that you would practice. Because honestly, it's going to help you in a different way and in a better way than if you're just to sit there practicing with your own kind of blinders on, So don't take up extra time. Just do the research and have fun with it and treat it as practicing. Because a lot of people think of it as extra. I certainly used to think of it that way. And it's made it so that I never got to doing it.
Yeah, because it's like you just want to play it. Everyone's like, oh, I just want to play.
Yeah. And then like I think we all forget, and I'm guilty of this too, especially when I was younger, that of just not listening to other people playing.
I like that. Okay, My next tip, and this one is, I mean, it's just so obvious, and I know everybody says it, and I can tell you about 5 of you, I don't know how many people are on the chat right now, but at least 50% of you are going to probably roll your eyes at me. But my number 3 tip is practice slowly. Please practice slowly. I want to start by saying that I've broken this rule more times than I can count,
me too.
and I still break this rule more times. I mean, we all do it. I'm like playing, I'm like slowly. You know, the only difference is that I've got a reprimanding enough voice in my head that says, stop, slowly. I think the problem with this is people misunderstand the function of slow practice.
Yes.
There's this kind of, at least I felt this when I was learning instrument in high school, when my teacher said to me, practice slowly, it felt like my teacher was saying to me, you can't play this. And I think that the shift for me has been our brains need time. And when we slow things down, we give our brains time to think about what they're doing. We give our brains and our body space to practice so that it's not practicing in mistakes. And also, and this is actually, in a sense, the really exciting part about slow practice, I find when I exaggerate musical stuff in the slow practice, it's amazing when I start speeding it up eventually, that stuff just comes through so beautifully. It's all there. All the groundwork is laid down.
Ooh, I agree. So some people listen to me practicing the Iber right now, and they're like, oh my gosh, like, how are you playing so fast? I could never play that fast. And I'm like, well, you just joined the stream. You know, like, I'm like, if you heard how I sounded a year ago playing this, it's actually insanely slow how I started it. I even go back to slow practicing now to check my posture, because my posture was very different. Like when I'm playing slow, I'm much more relaxed. Hence my posture is very different. And so it's studying my posture from when I'm playing slow and relaxed and then applying the same posture to playing fast. So I actually still go back to slow practicing. It's still worth it. It's still worth it.
Slow practice, guys. Slow practice.
Yes. I think this can be applied to slow practice to make and tweak a manageable practice list. Because I think when we're slow practicing, one of the things that is really important is to have some sort of actual mental list of like what you're checking as you are slow practicing. So I did also put on here that it's not about how much you're practicing in one session as much as it's how often do you practice. So it's this idea of volume over time rather than like a kind of like short burst of like an intense practice. Sure, those short bursts are really exciting and it's really fun to do them every now and then, but it's not sustainable, I would say. But practicing is actually a long-term project. And with it being a long-term project, you have to do it in a sustainable way. Like you have to, or else you're going to burn out. That's why I say like tweak your practice checklist too, right? Because let's say crazy stuff are happening in your life, right? You're going to have to cut down the practice checklist or maybe cut it down into 2 lists that you rotate between, right? Because life is life, you know? It throws you stuff. People get sick. You get sick, some stuff in the house breaks, stuff happens, and
crazy stuff. Absolutely.
You don't have time, right? So it's like, don't expect yourself to stay with the same practice checklist. Like tweak it as your life goes. The thing that my mom always said was like, us humans only have, she called it 100% kind of like a tank of energy. And so if you're spending like 70% of that energy worrying about something that happened, right? Pandemic, right? So then we only have 30% energy left for everything else. So like you kind of have to scale things according to how much energy you have. My mom has told my brother and I this since we were children, you know, like she's basically telling us, manage your tank of energy.
I love that. So the next one, it's become kind of one of like my tenets of practice philosophy, if I could say that. And it's this idea of being curious in your practicing, sense of like real like exploration and curiosity and just seeing like what else is possible. And I think if we have this kind of a way of thinking about our practicing, instead of, you know, you make a mistake thinking, oh no, you made a mistake, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad. You're saying, hey, I made a mistake. That's interesting. I wonder what happened.
Like I wonder where that came from.
Okay. Let's look into that. And I think it changes the language you use with ourselves. in my experience, what happens in my mind during a performance can directly be related back to what happens in a practice session.
Yes. Yes.
That those ugly thoughts that you have about yourself, those feelings that you have in a performance, that's happening in your practice session. It's just a little bit more masked.
Yes.
And a little less obvious.
Yes. Because it's all those mantras that you're telling yourself. They will just come to the forefront because basically everything is heightened in a performance situation, which of course means that those mantras are also heightened.
It's very, very, very simple. I mean, it comes down to sort of like cognitive behavioral stuff. Thought patterns become behaviors.
They do. It's that flinching thing, right? Why was I flinching in front of my teachers? Because I was doing that to myself in the practice sessions.
Absolutely.
Right? Rather than being curious about why I was making those mistakes, I just felt bad about them, right? And so, of course, that's heightened in front of a teacher. Oh, I actually already talked about this one, so I'm just going to mention it and we can just move on. It's comparing your posture between practicing slow and practicing fast. So
I love that.
Yeah, it's really, so I wrote here, your subconscious/anxious way of playing might legit have a totally different posture than when you're practicing slow. Because I was like, why is it that when I'm playing slow, I feel really good? Like physically feel really good. My fingers feel really good. I can hit all the notes, and stupid eBear has all these horrible, horrible fingerings. So I'm like, but then like, why is it that when I go fast, it's like it's a completely different beast, right? Like what happened to it? Right.
Totally.
So like when I actually went back to, like you were saying, slow practice, that's when I discovered that your posture can literally change depending on how you're feeling. Again, thought patterns becoming behaviors, right? And so like it's really interesting to make that comparison. What's your last one?
My number five. Always go into practicing with a sense of joy and actually putting the joy of practicing in front of you before you go. So I kind of started doing this thing where, I'd kind of be thinking, oh, I've got to practice. And instead of allowing myself to go into that loop of, oh, I've got to practice, I should practice, I go into think about how I feel when I'm playing. Yeah. Put that feeling of how I feel when I'm playing and the joy of it. And I put that in front of me first, and then I follow it. Oh. And I feel like it's much easier for me to actually get to my instrument because it's no longer this obligation and this chore. And if I can't get that and I start playing and I still can't find that joy, then I know that's a really important cue for me to stop. Because it's just not worth it. If I'm not feeling joy, then there's, like you say, the tank is obviously too empty somewhere. Something else is taking out that energy, and you need to stop because it's not gonna help you. It's gonna hurt you.
You might as well just relax with a cup of tea, listening to some flute music.
Absolutely.
Like it's if you don't have the energy, then make someone else play it for you. You know what I mean? Like,
I love it.
All right, my last one. It's actually exactly this point: is to take regular fun breaks. So so let's say we are practicing every day, right? So what I like to model it against is like a fitness routine. So a fitness routine, if you look at any good fitness routine, there are always active rest days. And they always call it this. So what they're saying is don't sit around like a potato, but you can like go for a walk or go shopping pre-COVID, like you
online shopping.
Yeah. And then like, you could do something that involves some sort of movement. Some people are like, oh, I'm going to like paint the wall in my room or something, like it's like something active, right? I started to think to myself, we really need to do this on the flute because you can really lose sight of why you're doing what you're doing if you don't also have fun, right? One of the biggest sources of burnout for my students who play the flute as a hobby is that they accidentally turned the flute into just a chore. It's like just drills. It's just exercises. It's just etudes. It's just working on these pieces that I assign to them. And so I've actually started to tell people, hey, at least one day a week, just play for fun. You're not allowed to touch any of the stuff that we're working on. You just enjoy the sound of the flute, play those Disney songs, play those movie soundtracks, or you heard something, you try it out by ear, right? Or you just listen to flute music, bask in flute land. You know what I mean? Like, isn't that what you were doing prior to getting into the flute, right? You were probably just basking in flute music and just wanting to play like that. But like, you have to revisit that.
I totally agree. I think sometimes the saddest things I hear is when students are like, I'm so sorry, I was just playing these Disney pieces all week, or I'm so sorry, I was just playing on Tom Play the whole week. And I'm like, that's fabulous. Go play, have fun.
I know.
Like, why are you doing this? If you're looking for a flute family, someone to encourage, then I cannot encourage you enough to get involved in some kind of community. Joanna, I know you've also got some community spaces, and just get involved in these community spaces, because you don't have to be doing this alone.
You don't, guys. We really need to be a community so that we can thrive, because that's how humans thrive, is through community. So that's what we're all about, guys.
And I'm really excited to see how our platforms and our channels and our communities, how we can interact more in future and carry on growing as an even larger big flute family and community.
That's what we want.
It's very exciting.
We will say our goodbyes for now. Love you all so very much, and we'll see you guys the next time we do this.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.